Hi, I'm Paige, or Novice Cosplay, and in this video I'm going to walk you through how to make custom seamless trim in any shape for any cosplay. This is a method originally created by Firewolf826, and you can find their text tutorial for the same thing linked below in the description. Now, I'm a highly visual learner, so I received Firewolf's permission to turn their text tutorial into a complete video guide that will help other visual learners like me. I also have some new tips and tricks that Firewolf didn't include in their tutorial that I think you'll find super useful. Now, I'm going to show you how to do custom trim on an upcoming character I'm cosplaying, Aelita from Code Lyoko. But really quick, I just want to share some other examples of other characters this would work really well for. So seamless trim will look good on any character with oddly shaped edges on their outfits. Some examples would be like this gold trim and light pink trim on the cape on Allura, the light blue edges on Skyward Sword Zelda's tabard. A lot of Genshin Impact designs have this, like Lisa's witch hat or Klee's little brown trim on her dress. And then a lot of Sword Art Online, Code Geass, Magical Girl, and Idol costume designs have this element as well. And you can see this works perfectly for Aelita because on her design, she has no visible seams. Curse you, anime designs. Anyways, let's get started. Before you get started on creating your trim, you'll need to have a completed pattern for your character. First, you need to decide how wide you want your trim to be and your seam allowances. So for mine, I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance because that's the markings on my sewing machine, so it makes it pretty easy to follow. And I made my trim 1¼ inch wide, or about 3 centimeters wide. You first want to trace this outer edge. Now this is where having a clear ruler really comes in handy, because if you don't have one of these, you'll have to mark a 1/2 inch out repeatedly and connect the dots. But if you have one of these, you can do it really quickly by just laying the ruler on top and marking 1/2 inch out. And be sure to extend it out at the point a little bit. And you'll repeat that on the bottom. All right, once that's done, then you want to mark your trim width. So in my case, that's 1¼ inch, or about 3 centimeters. You might do 1½ inch, 2 inches, 1 inch, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you line it up with your seam allowance line. And finally, we need to add another hem allowance to the other side of this. So I need to add a 1/2 inch to it. A faster way would be to add up your 2 hem allowances and your trim width and just mark the whole thing out in one go, just if you want to save a little bit of time. And then don't remember to add a little more extra length so that you have some wiggle room. Now, another important thing to mention is that when you cut this out, you'll need to make a straight cut from this corner to this inner corner, right here. That will make it possible to create this really sharp, clean, unwrinkled corner, which I'll show in more detail once we get to the sewing process. So I like to make a little mark there, just so I remember to make that slit, which you can see here. And there you have it. You now have your custom shaped trim. Next, I'll show you the other trim. So for the back of my pattern, I just have a simple rectangle which will connect to here and wrap around the back edge of the top. I do it in separate pieces because if I did one single long continuous one, it would start to waste a lot of fabric because it's such an odd shape. I'm also going to show you how I did the collar pattern, just because that one is kind of oddly shaped. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to trace the edge of your collar. Add the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You have to make really small markings on the curve. This one, on this side, you're not going to add seam allowance because you're going to place this on the fold just like with your back pattern. Next, you'll add your trim width to it. Then add the seam allowance on the outer edge. So you're going to end up with this kind of odd shape where it tapers to be smaller as you go higher up. Here's my final collar pattern. Now, the important thing is, though, you're actually going to want to extend this by quite a lot. So go ahead and extend your pattern by a couple inches. This will give you some wiggle room when you attach this edge to here. You might have to cut it a little bit shorter, but I always like to give myself a little bit of space in case I don't line something up perfectly. And there you have it. That is how you create your oddly shaped custom trim, which avoids folds and will give you a nice, flat, beautiful corner. Now that you've seen how to create your pattern, now let's see how to sew it and how to deal with those pesky corners. Mark your seam allowance on your trim and top with chalk or disappearing ink. Line up the trim, matching the marked seam allowance as shown. Then pin that down to keep it in place. Now, sew along your marked seam allowance, stopping exactly at the point. Then cut a slit at the corner, going as close to the seam allowance as possible. This allows you to twist your trim to the other direction. So twist it, line it up, and pin it in place. Then, starting at the exact point you marked, start sewing. Only sew a little so you can check that it looks nice and redo it if it has a fold. Here's what it should look like when you're done. Next, pin the rest of the trim down and sew it on normally. Let's go through those steps one more time. You'll follow the same steps as the pink top. Mark your seam allowance on the trim and the fabric. Line up one edge and pin and sew. Make a slit at the corner as close to the seam allowance as possible, then twist your trim and pin it to the other side, and sew. redo if necessary, and you're done. So many characters have this design element, and I think now that you've seen these examples, you'll easily be able to recognize it when you see it yourself. This trim patterning method should work for almost any crazy shape. I made a couple examples digitally here and here. You can see that you can also vary the thickness or the width of your trim, as you can see in this example. I hope you find this video useful in creating those crazy cosplay designs, but if you do run into any trouble, feel free to reach out to me across any of my channels. And if you'd like to see more cosplay tutorials, be sure to subscribe. Thanks, bye.